Hello, this is the first in a series of talks preparing you for the course I'm delivering in Regensburg shortly. We review some of the pre-tuition material, and today I'll start with topics in HTML and CSS. We have two subtopics here: a quick review of HTML templates and the core of HTML5, and then styling using modern CSS framework approaches. I'm going to talk about the HTML templates and general deployment issues here for a few moments. With four subtopics again: quick case study, which I'll review, the nature of HTML templates, deployment, and then in particular we look at how we can use open source projects Harp and Surge to combine templating and a simple deployment system. You can go straight to doing these labs if you like. The case study here is building a simple web page. This is installing and deploying those tools I just mentioned. And the third lab is a re-expression of the case study, except this time using templating and deployment capabilities I've discussed. Okay, I'll take a quick review of the case study if you're going to do it. And let's just switch to the slide deck here for a few moments. And let's look at what is in this case study. If you've got very little HTML background, then you probably want to work through this fairly quickly. If you know HTML in detail, then this can be skipped, possibly. It's entirely up to you. It's a review of a simple site that's implementing some modern HTML features. We look at the site structure, the way we've laid out our CSS, semantic elements in modern HTML5, and then some issues around fonts and images. First of all, let's look at the site itself. The site is on the left here. It's a simple, we might call it a brochure site. It's just demonstrating and illustrating a course we have running in Waterford. And on the right is the structure of this site in files on disk. You can see we're dividing the website itself into assets and strands pages. The assets contains images, and the image contains various PNGs and so on. The strands element is where we have broken up the core content, and this is where most of the content we're using for the site appears. Each page, I'm just looking at it visually here, is a series of images, text formatted left and right, some social media links at the end. It's fairly standard content. The home page we look at here now in a bit more detail. We can see the home page consists of a header, kind of a hero section we sometimes call it, or a banner. And then we've got the main content in two columns and a footer. And we map that onto the structure in our HTML source. We're using header element, articles, sections, and footers. And each of those is laid out, carefully indented and matching the structure of the page as we intended it. This is the main article part of the page, expanded with more detail. We see we've got a column, blank line, and then two columns, column 1 and 2. We also have paragraphs for each of the main topic areas. The CSS for this is shown here on the right. We have our header, our banner, our summary, curriculum, and then sponsors, footers, and special links. We're using standard box model, floating and clearing to achieve the multi-column effect. This box model, we don't need to go into it in too much depth for the moment, but we can see we can lay out the width of the entire page, the width of each column, and the floating left and right characteristics, which give us this simple two-column layout. Each of the individual strand pages is laid out as I'm showing you here. We've got our header, article, figure, another article, and a footer. And again, we've got specific styles associated with each of the images here: strand left, strand right, strand timeline, etc., which are fairly self-evident. The use of these HTML5 elements is important. We're not sticking with just divs everywhere. We're using nav, we're using article, we're using figure, we're using section, aside, And only if we don't find a suitable element from that list do we eventually use the div. Div would be the last element we'd picked for general divisions. So just reviewing that again, we can see header, article, section, footer. And these are indicating the web developer's intent in that we are using elements that have semantic or meaning in the context of the page itself. Here is our strand pages, and again it's header, article, figure, article, footer. And we could have used comfortably enough divs for all of these elements here, but it is more revealing of our intent and our page structure to have used the semantic HTML5 elements. Now the fonts, one aspect of working on the web is that sometimes there's a degree of uncertainty about what fonts may be available to us. And custom has grown up around what we call web safe fonts and then web fonts. Web safe fonts we'd expect to be always available, and web fonts we would require the browser to perhaps download the fonts before rendering successfully. Common pattern on the web is to use a web safe font as a backup if you wanted a more specific web font to be downloaded, so one or the other will be made available. Plenty of support on the web for getting a sense of what these fonts are. These are typical web safe fonts. You're probably familiar with these in day-to-day usage. Helvetica is one very common use, and on this particular site here we can see that we have an ability to generate CSS for us for particular styles, and we'd expect those styles to give us the expected font on display. Note that here we're using a series of fonts being specified, and these ones, this list here is a fallback list. If Helvetica New isn't available, go for Helvetica. If Helvetica isn't available, let's go for Arial. If Arial isn't available, pick any sans serif font. These are the web fonts, and again you can explore those in your own time. Open Sans is a very common one. It's manufactured by Google Foundry, I believe, and if you want to use this font, you must have the font downloaded in your header of your CSS, of your HTML usually, using this link. This will pull in the Open Sans font, and then once we pulled it in, we're free to specify it inside our CSS. Open Sans, quite appealing, and it's in fact the font I'm using on our course materials. This font, worth investigating a little bit on its origins and its characteristics. It's also quite common on Android, although I think it's been supplemented by other fonts subsequently on that platform. Now, rendering images on the web, I don't propose to go through this in great detail, but it is a kind of an interesting application of the mathematical skills you may have acquired in the past or maybe are currently acquiring. Rendering images has become quite complex because not only do we have characteristics of monitors, that is number of pixels in width and height, we now also have pixel density or pixels per inch. And this significantly ups the power and veracity of how the images can be displayed, but also makes it a little more challenging for general developers. These are common densities, and you can see they're all ranges because many devices now offer quite a broad spectrum within this, and in fact some more recent devices go beyond it at the very high end. Of course, this is the world of, particularly the high end is the world of the most powerful mobile phones, but also some tablets are showing some of these densities. When we're rendering on the web, we are familiar with the notion of a viewport. The viewport may change depending on the user's choices. Particularly on a desktop, the user has complete control over the viewport. and the user may choose to resize the window in any sense. Often on a tablet there's less control, and in the devices we may have a fixed viewport which respond directly to the size of the screen on the device. But on modern tablets now, that also is controllable, that the viewport can be halved or perhaps set at a quarter or 3/4 of the size, as opposed to being completely locked. Now, how do we produce images in this perhaps very dynamic environment? Number of solutions, really. The first one would be to ignore any differences, and in this case the images may render inappropriately. We just display the image. It may be cropped, or it may be incomplete for the size of the screen. Solution 2 is to set the height property, and this is something that is carried out in the examples we've just been looking at. That is, if we set the height property, that the image will be sized but not distorted. This kind of works, and it's a simple enough solution. It has a disadvantage in that the browser has to resize the image inside the browser device itself. For a desktop, that's not a big deal. For a phone though, particularly an older phone, that might require some local processing, which perhaps could be detrimental to battery size. So it's got a disadvantage. Third solution is to run with JavaScript. That is to resize the image in code. This is attractive in many instances, but it suffers some of the same characteristics of having the browser do it, because we are processing it locally. And a fourth solution is to use a new picture element. That is a highly declarative structure that's new to HTML. It's one of the few brand new elements that have been produced in recent years. Quick look at it. It's quite a sophisticated element, and it has a number of concepts that have to be grasped in order to make sense of it, including how you propose to direct the browser to display the image. We call this art direction based selection. The element is capable of taking into consideration the pixel density. The element is able to take into consideration viewport based selection and also image format based selection. All four of these can be combined into a set of rules that trigger which image is to be selected. This example here shows potentially what might be occurring in this context, and it's quite sophisticated. Just take one example out of this. Here we see on a phone we've got an image that is exhibits the letterbox effect, whereby the image is shown complete, but there are quite significant white or black bars above and below. On the right here we're showing the same image, and it's zoomed in to take advantage of the small screen and also to focus on the appropriate context within the image. On the left we would have just been using the image tag, perhaps with a max width or a specific height. On the right there's been a selection based on a range of images from the content provider using the picture element. Here's how it might look. It's not really that important for our course, but we're just reviewing it briefly as we go through. We see the picture element has got a number of new sub-elements. We've got a source, which indicates a specific file associated with a specific viewport. Another source with a different viewport, min width. And finally we've got an image which would be a fallback should neither of those min widths be appropriate. So in this variant of choosing an image, we're specifying multiple sources, and those sources are going to be selected based on the characteristics of the browser. And we have a fallback which is going to be used perhaps if the picture element is not supported. So these elements then are further supplemented with source set and media characteristics, and you can see those elaborated on here. These allow us to specify those characteristics as I've discussed. And a more sophisticated one would allow us to specify in source set multiple images. Again, you can see these images specify various descriptors, including pixel density. These are encoded into the name of the image itself. And we're expecting, again, the browser to have caused an appropriate one of those images to be selected. Okay, it's quite a complicated realm, in fact, who knew? It's not fully supported on all browsers yet, but it's a glimpse into the way the picture processing in future browsers is being handled. When an element arrives in HTML and it's not fully supported yet, the browsers often provide polyfills. These would be JavaScript libraries which can be incorporated into our source code, which can implement the image if the browser fails to support the image fully or at all. And the picture element, as it stabilizes, is incorporated using these facilities. Okay, that's a quick review of HTML and just some diversionary topics into the area of picture processing. Not particularly important for our course. We're not doing any image processing on our web development and DMAS program that you may be signing up for. But this short introduction just to give you an idea of core structure of HTML and the basic principles around which it works. There is a lab going with this particular case study, which is this lab here. And feel free to walk through this lab. It in fact builds up exactly what I've just done. In the lab you would be downloading some template material here and then proceeding through construction of the site step by step so you can get a feel for each of the elements I've been exploring. At each stage in the lab's construction you can see what your page should look like at this stage, and you can also download the code at any given point. This is this page you're building as we proceed through that exercise. When you finally get to the end, you would have proceeded to build this site here, which demonstrates all the features we've just been exploring. There's some exercise for you at the end here. Okay, thanks for your attention. I will be returning now shortly to give you a quick talk on templates in the next topic.